Welcome back to Global Lens. US and China resume talks as the 90-day truce expiry period comes to an end. The meeting, which is held in Sweden, is aiming for truce extensions by 3 months. Now, the current truce period ends on the 12th of August. This is the third time that US and Chinese officials are meeting since the US President Donald Trump raised tariffs for China. This meeting comes at a time when US is busy holding talks with multiple nations to strike a deal before the 1st of August deadline, a deadline which has kept many nations on alert, mostly those that haven't struck a deal other than China. The other Asian countries that haven't reached a deal with the US includes India, South Korea, Malaysia, Thailand, Bangladesh, Cambodia. We're joined by Victor Gao of Center for China and Globalization to understand more on US-China trade talks. How hopeful are you, Victor Gao, of an extension of the truce by another 90 days?
I personally hope something will be reached in Stockholm between China and the United States. After all, by now, China and the United States have known each other's bottom line very well, and their differences have been narrowed down again and again, and I think they are very close to reaching a deal. Now, on the other hand, the United States has brought in many other extraneous things. For example, now they call for removal of all the restrictions on the export control for the rare earth, but China insists that if the rare earth will be used for civilian use, they will be very flexible. But if the rare earth will be used for military use, China will impose very strict restriction. More recently, the United States has also demanded that countries like China and India and others should not buy oil or gas from Russia or from Iran. Otherwise, the United States threatens to impose up to about 500% tariff on their exports to the United States. Therefore, China is very clear about its bottom line. China wants to discuss and negotiate a deal with the United States, but if the United States chooses to fight the tariff war against China, China will fight to the very end. So let's hope sanity will prevail in Stockholm and China and the United States will reach a deal.
Right. Are you saying that China is not only looking for assurances that tariffs on Chinese products will not be imposed, but also these indirect sanctions in the form of 500% tariffs on countries buying Russian oil, then a 10% additional tariffs on BRICS nations, irrespective of who they are? These are being considered as informal sanctions in China. Is there going to be a discussion on these as well?
I do not know what the American side will really be up to in Stockholm. I think the United States by today has fully revealed its true color. That is, they are weaponizing tariff. They do not want to achieve their goal only through tariff. They want to use tariff as an instrument to achieve other goals. For example, they are not really serious about moving manufacturing jobs back to the United States. They want to use tariff and weaponize it to achieve other goals, including their geopolitical goals. Now, China has made it very clear. China is fully prepared to fight the tariff war with the United States till the very end. Let me explain it for your benefit. I think if the United States chooses to impose more and more tariffs against China, China will reciprocate. China will fight back. And by the end of the day, if China and the United States follow that line of thinking, the two-way trade in goods will need to wind down to zero. It's winding down to a complete halt. Now, China will be ready to suffer all the costs. Whether the United States is really ready to suffer all those costs, losing out on the China market, that's another thing. That's why I urge people in Washington to use their brain, to use their sanity, and to avoid weaponizing tariff for what goal, what purpose? No useful and constructive purpose at all.
Right. Mr. Gao, now these talks between US and China are taking place in the backdrop of the US being successful in striking deals with European Union, Vietnam, Indonesia, Japan, and that too on its own terms. It has got unprecedented commitments of investments also from Japan and Indonesia for that matter. Now, does that put China in some sort of pressure to come to an agreement with the United States?
Absolutely not. No one has really seen the so-called agreements between the United States or Japan, and the Japanese leadership has denied that they reached the deal as described by Trump or his associates in Washington. And for other deals, for example, Vietnam has different explanations, and no one has produced the real documents about the deal between the United States and Vietnam. Now, on a higher level of analysis, if the United States, being the superpower in the world, holds a gun at the head of any country, that country will really suffer a lot of pressure. It's not surprising, because holding a gun by the United States at the head of any country, big or small, is in itself not the right thing to do to start with. What the United States is doing is really throwing a big wedge into free trade. Now, destroying free trade is not in anyone's interest. It's not in China's interest.
Okay.
It's not in India's interest. And it's also against the fundamental interest of the American people.
Mr. Gao, my final question
is to defend free trade.
Right. Mr. Gao, my final question would be, how do you think these US-China talks, depending on the outcome, how will they impact India-China trade relations in the next few months?
Well, I personally hope China and India will get along with each other, respecting each other. After all, we are very large populations, each with a population of 1.4 billion. And I have always advocated for closer economic cooperation between China and India. And if China and India can really put our heads together, there are so many things that China and India can really cooperate to achieve. By today, the size of the Chinese economy is about 5 times as big as India, and China is very sophisticated and highly industrialized compared with India. That means China can really offer a lot to India in achieving a higher level of modernization and industrialization, improving the quality of their manufacturing sector by a big margin in India. And cooperation will be the better way for China and India. And I hope not only in the coming days or weeks, or in the coming years and coming decades, China and India can decide to cooperate with each other rather than otherwise.
All right. Thank you very much for joining us today, Victor Gao. Let's get you some trending stories from around